Hello, everyone. Welcome inside the Astro studio, where you get a peek behind the scenes of the work of the astrologers that you love to learn from. I'm your host, Sarah El Harar, Astro Auntie, and today I'm speaking to Jessica Lanyadoo, and I'm very, very happy and excited for this moment. I hope all of you watching know who Jessica is and love her as much as I do. And if you don't, run to everything that Jessica's been doing. She is an astrologer with 30 years of experience as a consulting astrologer. You're young but mighty. You've been doing
Mhm.
this for a long time, and you're an astrologer, a psychic medium, an animal communicator. You're the host of a very beloved and well-known and adored podcast called Ghost of a Podcast. And you're a teacher. You have also an app. You're going to tell me about your app. Your app is called Astrology for Days. And there's like so much to talk about you, and I'm so happy that you're here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me and for that lovely intro. I'm
Yeah.
excited to be here.
I'm so happy that you said yes. So let's
Of
start.
course.
That you said yes. She said yes. It feels very like yeah, proposal for marriage, Jessica. So, but seriously, thank you so much. I'm so happy that you're here, and I want to hear about your beginnings. I want to talk a little bit about your path and the things that excite you that you do. But first, I want to start here in Montreal because you were
Mhm.
born and raised here. And so I want you to tell me a little bit about who you were growing up here and how you met astrology. I think it's also like a very interesting path that you have. So
Mm.
yeah, tell us
Yeah.
about it.
So I was actually born in the States, but I was raised in Canada.
Oh yeah?
Yeah, I'm a dual citizen.
Oh,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
were you born in the States?
I was born in Ohio. Yeah, but I have never been. It's like we
I was
moved away when
born.
I was like 2 or something like that. So, but born in the States, raised in Canada, in Montreal specifically.
Yeah.
And my mother, was kind of like that hippie boomer who was like into tarot and astrology, but like in a very surface way. So there was like kind of books on the shelves about both topics, and I was always really interested in astrology, just very interested. And the adults around me would be like, "Oh, you're going to grow up to be a philosopher. You're going to grow up to be a counselor." And I was like, "Yeah, sure." Also, I never cared about those things in the way that I was interested in astrology. And then I went to new school at Dawson. So I went to CEGEP, which if you're from Quebec, and if not, then you can look it up, which I'm happy to say, talking to you. Everyone else I have to explain it to, but I'm just going to like let people look it up. But I went to an alternative CEGEP at which there was this teacher, Mike Boyle. He taught Jungian psychology at the main college, and then in the alternative college, he taught an introduction to astrology from a Jungian perspective in the first semester, and then the second semester he taught an intermediate class. And to my knowledge, those are the only two astrology classes he taught at the new school. I just happened to have been lucky enough to be there for them, and in by the end of the first week, I was just like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do with my life. And so I just studied astrology, and I was, so lucky because it was like 15 people, 10 people in a class. And he was a skilled astrologer, and he really taught us the beginnings and the basics. And I just ate astrology, drank astrology, slept astrology, thought astrology for the 2 years I was in CEGEP. And then by the end of them, this was now in 1994, 93, 94. I was like, I'm going to move to San Francisco to become an astrologer because at that time in North America, San Francisco was the place where you could be an astrologer. It was before the first .com boom, before it was like insanely expensive, and there was a lot of alternative lifestyle stuff. And also I'm queer, so it was like a place where I was like, I'm gonna go be gay. And so I went to San Francisco in the summer of 94. And yeah, I just was really lucky because I was able to connect with people like Lene Van Horn, who started the San Francisco Astrological Society. There was something called EBAC in the mid 1990s, which was the East Bay Astrological Society. Then there was, NCGR. So there was all these astrology groups there, and I was by far the youngest person in these groups. And there was like one other gay person that I was aware of in these groups, and he was a much older man. So while I really loved these groups and I got so much out of the communities, after a couple of years, I kind of pulled back because, the kind of cultural, social differences were too great. But I committed my life to the practice and study of astrology. And because I'm a triple Capricorn, sun, moon, and rising all in Cap, for me, it's about practicum. It's about practice. It's about consulting. That is, it's not that I didn't study and that I don't study, but it's, for me, practice is really the thing.
Yeah.
So that's my intro to,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's fascinating because like very few people, so for context, like CJEP is like when you're 17, so you're fresh
Mhm.
out of high school and you start to like deepen your studies. And so how many people get introduced to astrology in like the
Yeah.
formal context of school? Like nobody.
Nobody. No, I know. I got very,
It's
very lucky.
it's random, it's chosen, it's
Yeah.
like, I mean, it's weird and very
Yeah.
unique,
Yeah.
honestly.
All of those things are very true. And it's funny because in introducing me, you referred to me as a young person. Um, I am, not even 2 months shy of 50. So not a lot of people refer to me as young anymore. Usually they're 80 when they refer to me as young.
Okay,
But
allow me to believe that 50 is young, please. Like
no,
I'm
it is. Sure. It is. It
a
is.
very young astrologer. She's done 30 years of because it's the third fifth.
Contextually.
Do you
Yes.
understand what I'm saying? It's like how
Yeah.
many people like really are professional astrologers since they're and so now, hold up. So
Yes.
that's not true because actually now there's a lot of 20-year-olds
Yeah.
who are professional astrologers, but in back in our days, now we're old.
Yes.
Back in our days,
Yes.
there weren't like you really got plucked.
Yeah.
And it's Montreal, it's not San Francisco,
No.
you know?
No. Yeah.
And so, but there is like kind of a seed of every culture in Montreal in a weird
Yes.
way. Like if you dig, I'm sure you will find
Yes.
the
There
weirdo.
was there was a bookstore in the early 1990s. It was primarily French books. But I wish I could remember, was it I'm like smooshing it with San Francisco bookstores. I'm forgetting what it was called, but there was like a esoteric bookstore. It's where I got my like table de maison and like all these other like my ephemeris, and I got all these books. Most of them were French, but it there were astrologers in Montreal in the early 90s. In it's
Yes.
it, it's a very it was I can't speak to what it is, but it was a very eclectic place.
Yeah.
Um, and I mean, I love that I got to grow up in Montreal. I'm so grateful for it. And also, I do not believe that my career within that I include like my study, my ethos, my access would have been the same had I not come to San Francisco. Because there was this amazing movement of really smart, kind astrologers, and also not smart and not kind astrologers. There was
Of
a lot of
course.
different people, but there was so many people
Right, right, right,
practicing
right.
astrology. And so, I set the intention when I was 19 that I was going to commit my 20s to the kind of mastery of basic astrology, like, natal birth chart astrology, which includes transits and etc. But that by the time I was 30, I was going to commit myself to the study and practice of medical astrology because I was really motivated by medical astrology. Not to brag, but because I do tend towards hypochondria. So I was like, I'm going to, learn this thing and like, and like do this thing. And so by the time I was 29 was the first, maybe 28, 29, I can't remember now, but is when I started lecturing to other astrologers at SFAS and NCGR on medical astrology. And, again, like my access to so many really interesting astrologers and to going to lectures and getting to just have access to clients to work with. That wouldn't have happened anywhere but San Francisco. I don't think, not back in those days. And I think that today is a different day. But I I will say that like my love of the practice of astrology is it is not romantic. I do not believe in astrology, but I have dedicated, at this point, my whole life to it. And I had one little period for almost 12 months where I questioned it. And I was like, do I really want to do this?
When?
Do I want to become a therapist instead? It was somewhere in my 20s. It was just alienating and isolating. This was before the internet, right? And I worked out of, my bedroom, which I had a like curtain that I would hide my bed, and I would just have clients come into my bedroom in my apartment, and it was isolating and
And
it
so
was
for
hard.
context, again, this is like all in person. So
100, yes, of course.
right now,
Yes,
everybody's doing their readings on Zoom, their classes on Zoom. Like people feel like astrology is happening on the internet. But so
that is,
why there was an in-person culture in San Francisco,
yeah,
whereas I guess there is like astrology culture everywhere, but astrologers are like had to find each
yeah.
other
Yeah.
in
So
secrecy.
this was before Zoom existed, Skype existed, but there was no world in which somebody would be in the same city and using Skype. Whereas
Yeah,
Zoom now, I would do it with somebody
of
down the
course.
block. It's the internet existed, but it wasn't it wasn't
Right.
anything like it is. And
I'm
so
sure.
the only way to have a career is to have a client base that was local. And
Who were your clients at that time? Like, what type of clients did you get in San Francisco in the like late 90s?
Mhm. So in the 90s, so, really I started in 94, 95, and I went full time around 2000, I believe. But the 90s, it was first and foremost my community. So it was queer people, in particular queer women. Um, it was social workers, because I did, direct care social work, and artists. That's who it was. Sex workers. It was just my community.
The
And
witches.
what's that?
The witches.
The witches. Yeah. Although nobody identified as a witch.
No, not yet. But
No.
I mean, social workers, sex worker, queer women, and
Yeah.
artists, you know.
It translates. It translates quite nicely. So that, and then eventually, what happened was, my community would talk to their friends and their family members, and then those people would come in, and then so it just kind of like expanded from there. But I am of the mind, and this is consistent with my anti-capitalist values, build within your own community, serve your community. And from that place, your community serves you, right? It becomes this, you know, reciprocal relationship, kind of like you have in the garden. I water the plants grow. I get to, take a little and put it in my salad. To me, this is a good business model. And it's a good business model because it's ethical, because it builds community and it reinforces community, but it also is economically viable, right? Like if I support my community, then my community supports me, and that's not just like making, patting me on the back. It's like, it is a nice ecosystem basically. And I think that again, that is true with digital, with like an online based community, but it is more obvious and kind of more of a direct clarity point when you're building in-person community, right? Because it's the people around you. So you're like literal people you are connected to. So
Right.
yeah, so my clients eventually became everyone, you know, really, really everyone. I have clients who are clergy, who are working like finance and in tech and in real estate, and people who are deeply radical and work in direct care or don't work or work in kind of like underground communities and underground industries basically. So it's really expanded to a point where I don't think there's I don't think there's a community I don't serve, or that I haven't served. I've even had people come in literally in disguise because they didn't want their religious community to know that they were there. So I've had very religious clients over the years, in addition to, um, the people you'd expect.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And tell me something, do you find that your clients sometimes come in waves where either what you're learning becomes relevant or they have the same signature for a
Yeah.
moment? Like during a day, you'll see the same chart. Like, do you find the waves of client
Yeah.
similarity
Um,
during
I
periods?
definitely did, but I should clarify that. So back in 2017, 16, 17, I saw what was coming in 2020.
Right.
And so I stopped taking clients starting January of 2020.
Right. But
So I
you do
still
on your
do
show.
reading.
You do
Yeah,
readings on the show.
I do. I do readings on the show and I give them, and those are free to the
Yeah.
person who gets the reading. But from 95 until the end of 2019 or the start of 2020, I saw clients for a living. That is what I did. Um, and and then and I don't do that. That's not my how I structure my work anymore. So I went from one-on-one work to one-on-many work.
Right.
And and I don't think I could do that at the level that I do that if I didn't have the foundation that I have of, 20 something years, 20 something years of, full-time consulting work. Um, and so yeah, that is so I
Yeah.
did see that at that time, but that is not how I work anymore. So it's not how it goes for me anymore.
Right. Do you not define yourself like as a consulting astrologer like anymore? Do you not think this is what you do right at this moment in this
Yeah.
period of time right now?
Um, I've never been asked to define myself and I haven't thought about it that
Right.
way since I've made the shift. So I'm not sure how to answer that exactly, but I can say that, I was seeing 4 to 6 clients a day, 4 to 5 days. Well, yeah, 4 to 5 days a week, depending on the year. Um, it was 5 or 6 clients a day for most of my career. And then in the last year or two, it was 4 clients a day. And so
That's a lot. That's a lot of energy. That's hard to sustain, even if you're a triple
yeah,
Capricorn. That,
yes, yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Even
It was a lot. And also, I have very, very clearly identified as a consulting astrologer in that process. I'm not
right.
doing that anymore. So when I can contrast it to how I've spent the rest of my career, it's hard for me to be like, oh, I'm a consulting astrologer. I mean, I am. I'm not
Right.
an academic. And a lot of astrologers are academics and they're very theoretical. Um, I am a practicum person. And so, I definitely, I love doing readings, but I will say in a post-COVID world, I find it much harder to do one-on-one readings. This is why I haven't opened up my calendar again. And we are just in a state of flux in terms of social and collective conditions. And within that, I feel that my work better serves one on many instead of one on one. And yeah, yeah,
When
for
did you
whatever that's
start the podcast?
2018.
So
Yeah,
hold up. So is there also a correlation between like the podcast being such a great fit for you and that medium just like also being like so fitting for you? You're so good at it.
thank you.
People love it. It's like a really awesome, both like educational, and I mean, there's so much in there, so much you get to give on so many layers because there it's philosophical too, like it's existential, like Loki. I think sometimes it's like existentialism, pretending to be astrology. Sometimes like
Mhm.
this is the astrology is just The fate of
Basically, you're just saying the astrologer is a triple Capricorn, but yes, I accept. I accept.
and then you do these readings too, which are both like informative and at the same time, it's super interesting what you get from listening to a reading of another
Hmm.
person,
Hmm.
type of reflections you can get.
Yeah.
So, so you started in 2018. How long did it take? I don't even know when I started listening to it. I feel like forever. But
Mm.
was that when? Was that when, Jessica? 2018. How long did it take before it went boom, 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 boom?
So that's a good question. So friends and clients had been like, "Oh, you should have a radio show" for years and years, and I was always like, "No, there's no way I'm doing that shit." Um, and then I had this really great opportunity to be on. It was the Girl Boss launched, and they launched with a podcast called Self Service, and they invited me to be the astrologer. So I had like the last 10 minutes of every episode, and I would just do like a quick download. And I was like, oh, I love this. And it was podcasting, not radio. So it was like self publishing. I was recording from my home. I had a home office, but from my home. And it was like I kind of got really into it. And then when we got the word that the show was getting canceled, I had a week to make a decision. And so I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm gonna make up something. I named it Ghost of a Podcast because I was like, it's a whisper of a podcast. It's Ghost of a Podcast. It's not even really a podcast because I was just like, nobody's gonna listen. It's not gonna work.
I'm
But
not
it
here. You
started
can't
really.
even see me. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I'm a triple Capricorn, but I'm a 12th house
Right.
stellium triple Capricorn. So, I was just like, we'll see. And so, a week later, we launched the show, but we had thousands of listeners straight out the gate because people came from self-service podcast to Ghost of a Podcast. So I had this kind of built-in listenership,
Right.
and they didn't
Right.
have to lose a week of astrology. So that's how it kind of started. And I really didn't know what I was doing, except that I knew exactly what I was doing, right? So it was like a little bit of both. Uh, I knew what my motivation was. I knew what I wanted to be doing, like how I wanted to be impacting people, and within that, some of it was, giving readings, which in the early years, I would interpret a chart, but I wouldn't do it in live with a person. I didn't have the like editing infrastructure and all that kind of stuff. But doing readings for people, reading charts, sharing the birth data so that students of astrology and other professionals, and like pros, whether they're professional, just like advanced level, could pull up the chart and look along with me. To me, this is how I learn, right? I'm not an academic kind of person. I'm a practicum person. So for me, this is my way of modeling for people how to use astrology, the different ways that a birth chart can function, but also how to consult as an astrologer. Now, given not all astrologers are counselors, I am a counselor and I'm a trauma informed counselor. And I don't know if most astrologers are counselors or if, they structure it differently because I don't pay attention too much to what other astrologers are doing, which really bothers some people, but it is what it is. That's, I am a practicum person. And not only am I a practicum person, but I am self-taught primarily and self-taught in my basement apartment without internet. Right. So it's just like, it makes sense that like I'm not like paying attention to what other people are doing because I'm like looking in. That's my nature. So that said, I feel that it is very important to model appropriate ways of engaging with clients because there is a lack of information out there. And it's so niche. The few classes that exist that teach like ethics and counseling, they're usually one-offs and they're niche. You have to really like pay a lot of money already, be at a certain level, whatever. I want people who are never going to be astrologers, but who might pay an astrologer for consultation to have a sense of, oh, the way this person's talking to me, maybe they're giving me good information, but it's not necessarily that ethical or it's not that helpful. I want the consumer as well as the practitioner to have more information. But I'll tell you the real reason why I have my podcast It's
I
nothing to do with
love that.
astrology.
Hold up.
Okay. Okay. Great. Okay. Sorry. Yeah.
I love that intention. Like, okay, it's not the first and foremost intention. It's not why you're doing the podcast,
Yeah.
etc. But under the layers, there's also this kind of like consumer awareness
Yes.
of ethical behavior because
Yes.
our industry is ridden with,
Yes.
so not only are they not trauma informed, but they are trauma causing,
Yeah. Unfortunately.
actively harming people. This is something that I freak out about because I don't know why I'm given a lot of clients who were traumatized
Yeah.
by an astrologer.
So was I. So have I. I think that every consulting astrologer meets with many clients who had bad experiences with other astrologers. I've had bad experiences with other astrologers.
Like
I've had
that.
astrologers in our community tell me I had cancer, which was years ago and I never had cancer. Tell me like really dire and terrible things. And when I was like, well, professional to professional, it could be that or other things, they were like, no. Multiple people did that with me. And so,
Oh,
there's
yeah.
enough bad astrology out there and there's enough poor communication skills out there that
And
it's,
you're
I think,
setting a standard. You're like showing a standard, and you're like, okay, this is like a proper way of speaking to
yeah,
somebody and introducing. And sometimes you do have clients on the podcast who come with like serious stuff,
yes,
and you do handle serious stuff. And not everybody is a social worker like you, or actually, learned how
yeah,
to handle these situations. So it's brilliant. And so there's a form of like quality control. And also, what I think is interesting is how we can find ourselves listening to you talk to someone else. You can hear something, not necessarily a placement or something,
yeah,
but there's like always ideas, the titles of these episodes where you write kind of like an existential. It's
yeah,
not philosophy, Jessica. It's maybe not philosophy, but it's not, right?
right,
But you
right,
give like really big subjects to discuss to the many
yeah,
as opposed to the one.
yeah.
Wow.
It's astrology shows us something really simple, right? And I should preface this. I don't fuck with progressions. I work with the birth chart. I work with the
Wait,
birth
wait,
chart.
wait, wait, hold up. Yeah, yeah. Slow down. You don't
Hmm.
fuck with progressions like ever.
Hmm.
No.
I
So
have. I have in years past. But and forgive me as I sound like the triple Capricorn that I am,
a bit.
but yeah, I mean, we are what we are. I have come to find that the birth chart is a sufficient tool. It's more than sufficient. And that astrologers, in my experience, in their
Overcomplicate.
curiosity and in intellectualism, will, I find at times, use too many tools. And what this does is obscures what's actually helpful to the native. If you're trying to help the person in front of you, you don't need to progress a chart ever, ever. Now, I know that a lot of people would fight me on this, and I respect that because I don't
Okay.
think
Who
that,
cares? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I am myself and this is how
Yeah.
I
That's
practice
how
and
you
there's
practice.
yeah.
Exactly.
And so I'm not like teaching people that. I
No.
am just that is how I practice. And so the birth chart tells you what you need to know. It just does.
With
And so
transits. Yeah.
transits, birth chart, simple but imple, manimple, denimple. That's it. Like it's just direct as far as I'm concerned. So for me, my attitude is learn the chart, learn how to talk to people, help people. That's it. I don't remember what I was why I started talking about progressions, but um, I will say like
Very cool that you did.
just help people. Just help people. That's it. And a lot of times what astrologers, and I think every astrologer does this at the beginning of our practice, is we're like trying to prove that we understand it. We try to prove that we're accurate. We do too much. That's new car smell. That's like early astrologer behavior, right? But and this is what I'm remembering now, is that the bottom line, the thing that is so simple about astrology is that the birth chart, it consists of a certain very fixed small number of houses, a very fixed small number of zodiac signs, a very fixed small number of planets, and there's configurations within that are fixed. And so it should not be shocking when you hear a reading that I'm giving or somebody's giving to somebody who doesn't have your specific placements, but you're still identifying with it because you would have experienced parts of yourself in ways that resonate, right? Because I, might not have any placements in, Taurus, in the zodiac sign of Taurus, but I have a house that is filled with Taurian energies. I've had planets activate me through the zodiac sign of Taurus, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so somebody can I can hear a reading with somebody where they're like 7 million planets in Taurus and everything we talk about is Taurus and identify and really identify. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm identifying for my Venus. It doesn't matter. To over intellectualize is to miss the point. And this is where, if I may, I'm going to bring you to the thing I was going to say before, which is the real reason why I started the podcast and why I keep doing the
Yeah.
podcast. It has nothing to do with astrology at all. 0% astrology. It is 100% because I've seen what has been coming and I see what is yet to come. And what I believe is that we need emotional intelligence. I believe we need emotional skills and tools. And my greatest hope with my podcast and with my work across the board is that I am supporting people in cultivating the tools necessary, the emotional tools necessary to to participate in the world with kindness and empathy when in the presence of your fears, of danger, as well as when it's easy and fun and you get like presents as a result, right? It's easy to be kind to somebody who you like or you love because then they'll be kind to you back and then you have a nice dinner and then everybody's in love or whatever. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about one of the greatest threats to fascism is kindness, authentic kindness, putting your own security and stability not to the backseat completely, but to the side and prioritizing being an empathetic and ethical person, doing what is right, whether or not it's legal, whether or not it's easy. And I do believe we are on the precipice of incredibly, extremely dire times. I mean, we have been in really dire times for many years, but I imagine that many other astrologers would concur that 2025 is a turning point and it's a sharp turn. And
So can I
yes,
pause you here? I want to pause you
yes.
here. So two things. One thing about this is that I want to say that you're treating the podcast like your place in the community as somebody, so you're doing this radical community thing that you were talking about, like before your community was a one-on-one thing in your neighborhood, physically in your city, in your apartment, behind the sheet. Now you're doing this thing where it spreads a lot more. So you're addressing community in a much more like maybe from 3 to 11, right? Like really expanding it and giving because it's free. So anybody can get this education, can have these conversations, can listen. And what you are planting is seeds on how to be kind in community. Like this is how you're seeing, you're like
Yes.
spreading seeds of kindness because of the transits of 2025. I have other thoughts about that. Because you can't help us. Like all of astrologers, we're like looking at our
Yeah.
calendars and
Yeah.
we're seeing things and we're makers of meaning. That's
Mhm.
literally our job, is to see something and make meaning out of it. So everybody has their meaning. I read something that I'm choosing to stay with. I don't know if you know about this guy. His name is André Barbeau. He's a
Mm-mm.
French astrologer from the beginning of the 1900s.
Mhm.
And he predicted World War II and COVID. And he spoke of the transits of 2025, 2026 as the luckiest and best sudden peace moments listen, I'm holding him in my heart. I'm like, let him have seen it right. He who sees right. So all the ingress is at 0 degrees,
Hmm.
going into like the sextile formations and the nice trines and the Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 degrees of Aries as the aspect of sudden peace.
I have never,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have not seen evidence of that. Have you seen evidence of that in
So
history?
the end of apartheid in South Africa was Saturn conjunct Neptune. The fall of the Berlin Wall was Saturn,
Hmm.
and the
Okay.
Korean War. So there's like moments where it can bring something.
This is the tricky thing with astrology
I know.
because you could list three other things that are the complete opposite that happen
Opposites.
at the
Yeah.
Saturn Neptune conjunction, and I have, and I I I will share this. I want to say lots of things, but I want to say one thing here. I did see COVID coming, and I did see the social unrest of 2020 coming. And for 2 years, every client that came in, I was like, maybe don't start that storefront right now. Maybe wait to have a baby. Maybe just wait. And it was awful for me. It was really like, it was really, I don't think my clients loved it. Maybe, it wasn't like, I think it might have been frustrating for a lot of my clients, but also it was really rough for me as a human, not, not as an astrologer. As an astrologer, I was clear as a person. And then when 2020 occurred, I was going through it with everybody else and also seeing so much of what was yet to come. And for me, I will say, for years leading up to 2020, when I would be at like astrology conventions, I would talk to people I really, other astrologers I really respected and was like, what do you think about 2020? What do you think about that astrology? And everyone was like, you're overreacting. You're overreacting. I wasn't overreacting. Some of my timing was a little off about some of the things that I saw, but I was not overreacting. And my concern is so great that I have evaded looking too deeply at the astrology of 2025. It's not going to last because I have to put up my year ahead horoscope. But I woke up this morning thinking maybe I'll skip it this year, um,
Mhm.
because it's traumatized. I am very
Yeah,
concerned,
yeah.
and this is where
Look,
for me as a practitioner, I will say like, listen, I want this French guy to be right, obviously, but when I look at what's happening in the United States, when I look at what's happening, I mean, I'm not going to start naming all the countries, but in a lot of the places all over the world, I mean, it's not just astrologers talking about World War. You hear it on mainstream media. People are talking about, did World War III already begin? Are we on the brink of World War III? And for me, it's very hard to believe that we're not. Um, and that is not
yeah,
just because of the astrology, although the astrology speaks to World War
burns.
as well as Civil War in the United States. But it's for me hard to separate the news and what is actually happening here and now with the astrology. And I find, and the thing that's important about astrologers is we are people. And so everything I see and everything I say comes through my lived experience, my inherited trauma, my personal trauma, my values, my ethics, my politics. And that's true for astrologers who are like, I don't do politics. That's your politics. If you don't talk about politics, that's your politics, honey. Everything's political. The personal's political. We are feminists. We know this. If you're not a feminist, oh, I pray for you. But no, I don't pray that much, but I should pray for you. But all to
You're
say,
going to hell.
yeah, I mean, no, I mean, I don't believe in hell. So you just gotta, be wrong, but that's okay. It's fine. All of this to say, though, it is very hard to be an astrologer and see a train barreling down upon you and everything and everyone you love and sit and analyze that train and be an impartial, objective,
It's gonna
analytic
run on
person.
you too, though. And so that's the thing, is that the train is not only gonna go, it
It's
the
on you.
here.
Yes, of
Yeah,
course. Yes,
it's on everybody, right?
yes,
And it is
yes,
momentous. And so this is for now, this is what we are certain of as astrologers, is that 2025 and 2026 are some of the biggest transits of the century.
yes.
And literally Saturn and Neptune meeting, so they have met in the past, and I've looked for hours. into
Hmm.
past conjunctions, the 0 degree Aries, that being really, I mean, the beginning of the zodiac, arguably maybe the most important degree of the
Mm.
zodiac,
Hmm.
them meeting there, all the outer planets going into ingress at 0 degrees at the it's momentous. That
It's
we know for
momentous.
sure. That we know for sure.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's hard to decipher our lived experience from history. And I think
Yeah.
part of us as astrologers are kind of historical recorders,
Yeah.
right?
If you
And
do
so,
mundane astrology, if you do mundane astrology, which a lot of astrologers don't, and that's
right.
great. It's
But
true.
even if you do practice astrology, and so that's where humanistic astrology is like really like, oh, the same way, you can't separate the personal from the political.
Mm.
You can't, in humanistic astrology, you can't separate kind of like the mundane from the personal, and including the context of the human in front of you. You can't
Yeah.
you know,
That, and also I would add to that, there are many forms of astrology, one in particular that anyway, there are forms of astrology that put the astrologer on high. The astrologer knows, and the astrologer tells you this is
right?
what's going to happen, this is when it's going to happen, this is what it means. And within humanistic astrology, it's not about decentering the astrologer, but it's understanding the astrologer as a fallible human who is standing on the tracks with you while the train barrels down upon us all, right? It's not attributing like guru like wisdom to an astrologer. I think that that's a very important part for me of
Yeah.
humanistic astrology, and it's connected to what you're talking about. And you know, I
Mhm.
I really, coming back to my hope for the work I do is that the astrology isn't the point. The point is whether or not you're into astrology, you can have a consultation with me. Whether or not you're into astrology, you can listen to my podcast because the astrology isn't the point. What's the point is how to live well, how to navigate fear and terror and trauma, how to empower yourself to live well and to live well outside of toxic individualism, which Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Aries, we don't have to keep going, but we could. We are seeing a spike of. We are seeing a spike of, and we will continue to see a really horrifying spike of toxic individualism. And this is, for me, wrapped up into the surveillance state that we are living in through technology. And, AI is poised to make our lives so much easier. If I use Google and I Google something, I get an AI response right away, and it's like right there, and it kind of answers a lot of questions. But AI is so destructive for the environment, and it is ethically very complicated. And we are not prepared as a society, any society. There's no like nation or culture or country. We are not prepared to cope with what AI will do and how quickly it will do it. And to imagine that this is associated with the golden age, this is where I will just kind of pose the question of whose golden age? Elon Musk's golden age? Donald Trump's golden age? Mark Zuckerberg's golden age? Maybe. Not mine, I don't think. And I would like to think. I would love to be wrong about that. But I have a hard time understanding the news and what's happening and the astrology
Right.
and imagining that some sort of like freedom bursts forth from our current conditions. And if that freedom does burst forth, which I am going to consistently work for, it will happen on the backs of the most vulnerable amongst us, unfortunately. And this is where, again, as spiritual people and users and fans of astrology, my concern is always that we turn our backs on common sense. We turn our backs on the immediacy of what's happening in the here and now because it's so hard to look at, because the train is barreling down upon us and there's no way for the train to feel good. And this is where I come back to our ability to use astrology and to contemplate what comes next is interwoven inexorably with our ability to cope with terror and fear, because you can't see COVID coming and not be terrified. You can't see, fascism, the rise of fascism, or a world war and not be terrified, unless you're a terrible person who believes that you are immune, and if everyone else suffers but you, it's okay. And there are astrologers who fit that description. They believe that they'll be okay, and therefore if other people struggle,
I
it's
think
okay.
so. If I can make the case for the horrible
Yes.
astrologers, I want to try, okay? It's that in thinking that when you see the picture from the vantage point of humanity, like thinking that if we're looking in Pluto cycles. So yeah, I saw a lot of people celebrating Pluto getting into Aquarius, and I was like, my sweetie, how? How are you This is like literally like it means totalitarianism.
Yes.
What it
It's really
means,
just, yeah,
mind control. It
yeah,
literally,
yeah,
so what do
yeah.
we do with that? But so some people are looking at also under the premise that the evolution of humans is positive, that we are going towards a better society. And so a lot of us, this is also fundamental in the work of building, of world building and planting seeds, is to still have part of your hope that actually things will get better. And sometimes in the moment where the train is coming, we can like brace ourselves, like in the airplane, God forbid. Okay, you're in the airplane, brace yourself for impact. You brace.
Yeah,
You
to
brace
brace.
and you hope,
So,
So
so here's my concern about that. And I'm not, I understand the complexity, right? Of some people are very Neptunian or Jupiterian, and they're like hope,
yeah,
possibility, and that's and
and I
I
can't
want those people
Saturn
to
all over.
exist. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, I want
Yeah,
those people to exist, and I want their work to thrive. And I am not
right.
trying to say that that's not a valid way of being, but from my perspective, which is decidedly very Plutonian and Saturnian, one must have an identity that is not marginalized to truly hold that perspective in Marjorie Taylor Greene's America. One must choose to identify with the people in power in order to hold on to that hope as the primary thing. Now, I'm not saying hope for future. I am saying, though, to believe. There's people who are just misinformed about astrology, who are just, astrology fans, and they happen to have read things. But the people who are like astrologers or serious students who look at this astrology and think golden age, of course, things are going to be good. Pluto moved out of Capricorn, things will be fabulous. You have to ignore everything
You have to
that
ignore
is
Pluto.
happening. You have to ignore that people are still sick and dying of COVID. How many people died? You have to ignore the ableism, the racism, the colonization. You have to ignore how many people are living through apocalyptic conditions right now on this planet, in the United States as well as abroad. You have to ignore that nuclear war is talked about on the news and by global superpowers every week now. You have to choose to say to yourself, okay, sure, but the astrology, but the sextile. And to me, this is like a misuse of the tool, because the tool has to be held in context, right? This is why your favorite pair of jeans are not empirically the best jeans. They're the best jeans for you at this time, with your body as it is, with the styles as they are. It's contextual. And the same thing is true with astrology. And again, I am a humanistic astrologer. I am a triple Capricorn. I am acknowledging these parts of my lens inform this perspective that I have. But this is my lens and this is my perspective. And I think that, you know, if there's going to be any golden age of any fucking thing, it will be because everybody acknowledges their privileges, acknowledges their assets and their strengths and their power, And they use it not just for their own individual security and safety. So when you brace, what do? You're like, your arms go tight, you're holding yourself. We need to learn how to brace together.
Mhm.
Pluto is in Aquarius. We need to learn how to embrace together and to understand that leadership and that agency, when it is not in that Neptune in Aries, that kind of like we are interconnected perspective. When we don't have that, we will have the worst of humanity play itself out on the backs of everyone else. And that's how it's always been. And we've had moments
Right.
where it hasn't, but that's
Well,
how it is.
when was that? Like I'm thinking like in my world, like that 1988 was kind of nice. Like in my I have like a
Yeah.
version like history where like history took a break and it was summer of
Wasn't that the
1988.
AIDS, wasn't that the AIDS crisis?
Oh fuck. Yeah, it was I
So
mean
this is what, but this is my point,
exactly.
is that for
Exactly.
some people, there it is always an apocalypse.
When is it not? Exactly. So when is it
Yes.
not? We're in like an ongoing massive horror
Mhm.
story. This is
Yes.
not, it's
This is
not,
the human condition. Yes.
this is just I mean, it gets sadder, I think, for us, the more we go around Earth and the
Hmm.
more sadness, we get tired after a
Hmm.
while, you know? And so I think it gets exponentially sadder as you age.
Yeah.
Um, because there is that realization at some point that no, history is not going to stop doing what it
Yeah.
does. And usually history is always horrible.
Yeah.
If it's not horrible, it doesn't make the history books.
That is partially true. But I will say this, for whatever this is worth, especially if you're a young person listening. I sit here at 50 and I know I'm actually a month or two shy of 50, but I've been telling people I'm 50 for a year, so I'm sticking
49
to
and
it.
a
Yeah.
half.
Not even a half. I got a month. I got a month. But okay, I sit here at 50 and I have never been as determined and driven by love and committed as I have been in my life. Like I think that we can, yes, be more realistic, but realism is required for being determined. And we are not going to have this golden age of anything without being determined to take care of each other, without being
Yeah.
determined to use technology to make the planet and humanity better instead of to oppress it. Like there are always helpers, to quote, what's his name? Mr. Rogers. Look for the helpers, is what he said. And there's always helpers. Be the helper. This is again, when I come back to like my podcast, this is my ambition for the podcast, is to help people understand that your suffering is unique to you, it's personal to you, it's true to you, and it's not exclusive to you. Your suffering is universal. And if your suffering is universal, then you can share it with others. Then you don't have to isolate. Then you can build resources and communities with others, whether it's online, it's in person. But the truth is, we see over and over again how people prize their individual security and stability over the needs of
The
others.
many.
This is toxic individualism. And in the United States, I mean, we're really, really good at it. And I think that it's incredibly important for us moving forward to understand the impact of our agency. And doing nothing has an impact, because when you're doing nothing, you're doing something. And this is just a part of life. It is a part of life. And my hope is that we evolve as Pluto moves further from Capricorn, away from carceral ways of thinking, the way we've used the internet to police each other and other people. You said it wrong, you did it wrong, that kind of thing. Because if we can move away from that kind of behavior, we can start to build real coalition and community. It is possible and it is necessary, but it's not going to happen like, I mean, we're dealing with the rise of fascism and we're dealing with the realities of world war. And, and it is it is really scary. And so if we don't learn how to cope with the feelings that those realities provoke inside of us, then we will dig our heads in the sand until somebody rips them out. And that's what happens in most situations of war and of struggle is you dig your head in the sands until someone rips it out. And so developing the skills and the tools to take your head out of the sand, to look around, to assess, to make choices. Then you can put it back in the sand when you need to. That to me is sustainable. And it's a way of, it's the way that we get our golden age, if we are to get one,
I
you know?
mean, yeah, the golden age, like if that, then that would suppose like a destination. You know what I mean? It was supposed like something to arrive at, which I don't think that's the nature of Project Humanity. You
Yeah.
know, I think the
Yeah.
nature of this project is this trying to transcend the muck into something better, and that there's always going to be ways to do that. But what I think is fascinating is really what I'm understanding now is that you're so that like astrology became a medium. So I often think about like how astrology is just a way for us to make meaning. Like so many, they're just meaning making or thinking, um, contextualizing. And so how this has become the medium for you to do this community care, right? And to
Mhm.
give like what you had to give in this community role of like the town astrologer, you know.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, and you go in your, do you have a closet at home to record? Like where do you record? Do you have like a little place or where do you
So for the last 10 years, I've been living in a place where I had a recording booth in my backyard. Um, and so I had a podcasting booth. And a friend of mine built it for me and he called it the God Pod, which I
Yeah.
love. But I am in the process as we speak of installing, soundproofing in my little new studio, my new place. So this will be that spot where I do all my work.
So like a 12th house stellium, you go in your room where you're actually
My
alone.
dark little room where I'm alone. That is the ambition. Yes. Yeah.
It's so funny. You're actually alone. You're talking to a bunch of people
Hmm.
about the condition of humanity,
Hmm.
right? Using the language of astrology kind of like to illustrate and support and for you to be like what does it offer you like in your practice? How do they come? Do you find solace? Do you find respite? Like is there
I
something
don't look for solace or respite.
no?
It's not my nature to prioritize. That's not where my viewfinder's pointed towards. My I'm motivated by meaning. I'm motivated by progress, and the work I'm doing now, the one on many, public facing community based work I'm doing now is much like the one on one consulting that I did for 20 something years. It's the only thing I could do. Like I just feel this real clarity of purpose. Um, and the really cool thing about astrology is that I can talk about Saturnian principles and lunar principles and Venusian principles. And whether one hears that in psychological terms or in philosophical terms or in, astrological terms or, whatever, however a person takes that in, it's all good. It works either way. And that's what I want. Like teaching astrology is very valuable, but it's not the point for me. It's teaching humanity, giving humanistic tools for the human condition.
You just
That's what's
happen to be an
motivating.
astrologer. You just
Yes.
happen to be an
Yes.
astrologer. So you speak
It's
in
not
these
the point.
terms. So
Yes.
you speak
Yeah.
in that language, and that's the
Yes.
way the words come out of you because you're an astrologer, the same way that you're English speaking, and so it comes
Yes.
out in English, but that's not the point.
Yes.
That's fascinating. And so that happened gradually as the podcast, like,
I mean, that's always been my motivation. So even as a one-on-one consulting astrologer, I, in the very early years, would be like, okay, you have this and that and astrology. I would use astrology language, and people would leave and their heads would be spinning. And
right,
so, in the early, the first decade of my practice, I figured out don't speak astrology, speak
speak plainly.
normal, just
Yeah,
speak plainly. And if a person's really interested in astrology, I can adapt the way I communicate. And
right.
so, I've always been motivated by helping people and not by, astrology per se. Astrology is the medium, as you said, it's not the point. Now, in regards to the podcast, I had to switch back because, and
Uh-huh.
I have to train myself to remember to mention where I get what astrology got me to have this insight. Because for instance, the things I'm saying about what I think is coming in the world, rise of fascism, world war, I'm not referencing the astrology. You know the astrology. I don't have to in a conversation with you, but it is the public conversation we're having. So
Right.
technically it should be. But to me, there is more merit and value, not merit, there's more value, there's more utility in just saying the thing instead of getting into the astrology. Because here's what happens with astrology. I say to you, okay, there's going to be a Saturn Sun square coming up astrologically or whatever. And you hear Saturn and you hear Sun and you hear square and you hear Saturn Sun square, and a million things occur to you, and they might be completely different than what occurs to him and to her and to me, because there are many ways that we can interpret. And what I would like to do is be more direct in what I'm saying, which is less astrological in a way. Uh, so I think a lot of things, but I will say that one of the things I think is that with the rise of conspirituality and the rise of religious extremism and, right, white Christian supremacist shit that happens online, that encompasses astrology. It encompasses astrology. And it would be unethical and unwise to imagine that any astrologer who is putting out any content in the world, whether it's only one-on-one or it's in public, does not have a responsibility to be mindful of that, because we are participants in this larger thing. And so
Yeah.
finding ways of communicating around that, I think is essential.
Yeah.
It's
And
essential.
100%, can I weave this back to
Yes.
what we were talking about in the beginning of astrologers and fear mongering and the people who say, oh, you might have cancer, or the
Mhm.
person who told my client that she would never have a baby or else she or the baby would die.
Oh my God.
And that's because, wait for it, she has Saturn conjunct Mars in the fifth.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Oh God.
I
That's
mean,
wild. What a ridiculous prediction.
can you imagine that? And so
What a
she's
ridiculous
sad
prediction.
and broken and like just defeated. And a lot of like the sessions had to be about like me
Right.
proving to her what an idiot this
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
There's
Right.
nothing wrong with her chart, but that this
Yeah.
person is a legit idiot.
Yeah.
And so there's something with astrology and mediumship where
Hmm.
people, when they're a medium, they feel really confident maybe about their message, and maybe they don't have a method of practice for checking themselves.
Yeah.
And
Hmm.
because there are industries or a tarot reader, or because there's no regulation, there's no
Yeah.
formal education on ethics, although the schools where I taught and a lot of like good reputable astrology schools have ethics as part of the curriculum,
Yeah.
because we must, because a lot of people are weirdos like that.
Hmm.
Um, but so with mediumship and in like intuition in readings, like, and
Hmm.
how that can be sometimes problematic in a way, like to let, how do we not let ourselves come in the way really of the reading in a way. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so with all of these things, when you're talking about the political and the religious, and so if we are, so where I think there is something that's difficult to navigate for astrologers is that if you are the maker of meaning, you are so for yourself. It's really um, dangerous, delicate, um, you know, potentially harmful to make meaning for someone else,
Mm.
right? Or to
Yeah.
you be the ascriber of meaning for everybody. And so that becomes like a really like delicate dance between an astrologer and their people and an astrologer and
Mm.
themselves of like just trying to stay a little bit flexible with the thing without
Yeah.
imposing themselves. Yeah.
So I have two questions, but also, I want to see if I can turn on my heater if you can hear it. Okay. Because if it's
Okay.
loud, I won't. Um, hold on, because I'm freezing in here. Can you
Usually,
hear that?
no. Zoom is so great at the
Great. That's smooshing it out. Beautiful, because I'm freezing.
that's
Um, okay, good. So when you say mediumship, do you mean like speaking to dead people? Is that what you
okay.
mean?
So wait, mediumship only means speaking to dead people or spirit
Yes.
or yeah, it's just talking to
Yeah.
spirit, having like really downloads. I don't know if it's necessarily dead people for everybody, question mark, is it?
I think that's what mediumship means. So there's
Okay.
psychic ability. Psychic
Psychic.
ability
Maybe I'm
is
like,
downloads, but yeah,
yeah,
mediumship is specifically when
dead
you're in the
people.
middle between the dead and the living, right? So that's
Okay, you're in the medium. Okay, I
yeah,
get it now.
that's what that means. Yeah. So mediumship is different than psychic. So I just think,
Right.
my I have
And
to clarify.
psychics would get from everywhere. You don't know. We don't
You
know.
can get
Psychic.
from different kinds of psychic ability functions in different ways,
Right.
but mediumship is specifically about communicating with the
Dead.
dead. So I think it's a really important distinction.
Thank
Um,
you for that
oh
because I
yeah, 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 yeah. And it's interesting because I agree with everything you're saying, and also, right, it's very hard to give a reading and not be a maker of meaning.
yeah,
You
because
have to make meaning of what you're seeing, right? And so it's like to be able to look at, so for me, as I am a psychic and a medium, I can be in a conversation with somebody and then feel that their anxiety spike. So I can pause and be like, hey, I'm noticing your anxiety spiking. Is that correct? And if they say yes, then we dovetail the conversation so that it stays present. I agree with what you're saying completely. It's very, 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 very complicated and tricky, and it is very subjective. One of the things that I do in my consultations, in particular, like in my like one-on-one consultations, right, is I say at the beginning of every session, I am a person, and I could be right about 9 out of 10 things and wrong about one. I could be right about 50% and wrong about 50%. And just because we've had sessions in the past, just because your friends had a good experience, just because you've heard me on a podcast, doesn't mean everything I say is right. You are the judge and you get to decide. And I think that this is really an important thing for astrologers to have a practice around saying. And also, it's important for us to be realistic that the client comes to the astrologer because they want an answer and because they want they want clarity and they want an answer, and the client needs to take responsibility for not giving away all your power to a reader, to use your common sense. If the person starts talking to you and everything they say you're like, that feels wrong, that feels wrong, that feels wrong, then they're wrong. You get to make that determination, and what you do with the information is important, and it's yours. And I think that those things are really important for us to acknowledge that, we as a culture, I think, have a habit of giving too much power to consultants, right? You go to a doctor and you just are obedient to the doctor? No, they're a person. They're interpreting. They're under your employ. I think it's really important that to acknowledge both parts, right? The part where we as individuals who are paying for consultations or getting consultations have a responsibility to our own selves. And also, we as practitioners we have a responsibility to acknowledge the power we have before we even open our mouths, right? And to be really careful about that. And if a practitioner sees something that is very, very good or very, very bad, and you feel that it is constructive and useful to talk about it, to acknowledge this is what I'm seeing, and it could play out in different ways. This is how I'm interpreting what I'm seeing. And I do that with the very positive as well as the very negative, because making a very positive prediction can be just as
Right.
destructive as a very negative one.
Right. I think as a rule of thumb, like one of the th things that I've taught in schools is to do like a very positive possibility, a very negative, like some things in the middle, right? And always formulate things as a question
Yeah.
and try to give it back to them for them to be able to kind of like actually tell me because
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
actually don't know what the Saturn Mars conjunction in your fifth house looks like and how you experience it. But
Yeah.
if I give you enough vocabulary around what that could be, then you get to tell me
Yeah.
actually how you live it. And so we get to work with it if it's
Yeah.
an issue and if it's not. But yeah,
Yeah.
giving it back to them, but that's a thing. And so do you get like in your, so let's say you'd be in a reading, like do you know how to decipher like what's what, or like to stick to, and I'm talking about your psychic abilities, your
Yeah.
mediumship, like are you able to turn it off and on voluntarily? Are you
No, but I have boundaries with it. But I also, I agree with what you're saying, and I think what you're saying is wise and a very good way to be. But I don't phrase all of my interpretations as a question at all. Some of that is because I am a triple Capricorn. I am a hammer, and that is my nature. And so I do my best to work with and around that, and to be diplomatic and to be constructive, but also
honest?
I'm a hammer. And and also because at this stage of my career, I am really confident about a lot of things. And so, like, for instance, Mars Saturn conjunction in the fifth house, I ask a bunch of questions. And then, based on the data the client gives me and the data of the birth chart, that's when I start to make my predictions and or my assessments. And so, some people have that aspect and they have a really challenging first child, right? That's a classic thing. Some people have a really hard time with conception. Some people have a hard time with sexuality and they don't have a hard time with conception. Some people don't want kids. There's so many ways it can play out, that kind of an aspect. But the way it doesn't play out is sex is always fluid and easy, and procreation is easy, and parenting is easy. Like all three of those things for the person with Saturn Mars conjunction in the fifth, usually not. No. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. And it certainly doesn't mean death. That's a ridiculous prediction. I don't even know where that person comes from. But I remember, but oh, wait, that's a whole, sorry, I was going to go off on a whole other tangent. But all to say, like, I think what you're saying is the right thing. I want to be really clear. It's not what I do, and I want to be forthcoming about
Yeah,
that.
and so that's what I'm saying is that like are you able to like decipher because you do have the insurance, does the insurance come from like someplace else? Is it the 30 years of actually reading charts and
I
seeing
don't
clients
know.
that confirm? Do you have like okay, is it being actually a triple Capricorn in the 12th or
Being
like
psychic. I mean,
being psychic, like having the
it's
con
all of those things.
yeah.
I couldn't.
You couldn't not bring just the whole of you to a reading. Like you
I would say, listen, like I couldn't know which is which to answer your question in a clear way, because I could not be psychic in a reading. Sometimes I make the decision to ignore all my psychic impulses. Sometimes I don't look at the astrology at all. Sometimes, a lot of times, mediumship is irrelevant, right? Because I'm not talking to dead people, then it's not relevant. But I am at a place in my work, and I've not always been in this place, but I am at a place in my work where I can weave my counseling skills, my astrological mastery, my psychic ability, and other things, together. And the weaving, I'm not even thinking about it when I'm doing it. It is organic, it is practiced, it is intentional. And sometimes I trip up, I make mistakes, and sometimes I don't. But for me, I can separate my psychic ability and my practice of astrology. And when I'm like building out an astrology class, for instance, I actively, intentionally do that. But when I'm consulting with a client, unless there's a reason, and sometimes there is a reason, why would I rob you of my ability to get in the nooks and the crannies that I couldn't astrologically, and not use my psychic ability? So I don't know if my confidence and my willingness to assert things comes more from my counseling skills than from my psychic ability, or if it comes more from astrology or from psychicness or from like the like where the pavement hits the wheel. Like I don't know if it's like actually like that sweet spot that does it for me. I don't know. And from unless somebody's trying to emulate what I do, it's completely irrelevant where it comes from and what it, you know what I mean? Like that's kind of my attitude is
Yeah.
like, apples are delicious because they're delicious. And sometimes I eat apples that aren't delicious. And sometimes I eat apples that are delicious and then I bite into a part of the apple and it's not delicious. I don't think about why. It just is or it isn't.
I love that. It's not very characteristic actually of Capricorn. I find it
Oh,
surprising, right? Like,
really?
yeah, this thing of like, oh, I'm gonna show up, do what I do, and it's gonna be, like without the, I don't know, like the anxiety, I would imagine, like a Capricorn.
Okay, so let me speak to that. So what you're talking about is absolutely 700% correct. A Capricorn is hyper vigilant out of a fear of being wrong and wants a lot of approval out of a fear of being wrong, right? Saturn and Capricorn, very much like that. And that is inherent to my nature. But what I've worked really hard on is prioritizing
Being right.
humility. No, humility. It's the opposite, actually. I am not attached to being right.
Uh,
That's the thing. It is the only thing that gives me the confidence that I have. Because listen, I give readings to people. Here's an example of how this has played out. I gave a reading to a woman many, many, many years ago. God, it had to have been, it was many years ago, less than 20, but many years ago. And we had a reading. I talked to her about a number of things. One of those things was her alcoholism. And I was concerned for her alcoholism. And I talked to her about it and, how it was impacting her life. And she was like, this is stupid. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have a problem with alcohol. And, I didn't, she clearly didn't like 80% of what I said. And she didn't especially like me. And I never saw her again. And the whole time I was giving her the reading, my ambition was to help her and to support her and not to be right. And so when she told me I was wrong, I was like, okay, that's fair. I'm sorry. How should we redirect the conversation? She came back to me less than 10 years, but close to 10 years later. She brought me flowers. And I was like, why would you bring me flowers? And I barely remembered our first session. And she said to me, I was so mad at you. I was so mad at you during the whole reading. I did not like you. I did not like a word you said. And it helped me to get sober. And, years later, things you said clicked. And I was able to go back to the recording and listen to it. And I got so much out of it. And it was very kind of her, to bring me flowers or whatever. And the reason why I remember this exchange, because I've had lots of exchanges like this over the years, like many, 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 many. But this story stands out to me because she brought me flowers. And that's unusual, right? For a client to walk in with flowers. But if I had been attached to being her friend, getting validation from her, I wouldn't have given her the reading that helped her change her life, right? And this to me is really important because in my experience, a lot of times, if I'm saying something and it's not landing for the person, sometimes I'm wrong. And I think it's very important. Sometimes I'm wrong, for sure. And sometimes I've picked the wrong metaphor, I've worded it wrong. And I
or
have
it
to look
was
at their chart.
the wrong time to hear it. And
That's
so
the third time. That's the third
I
example. Yeah.
I think this is like it goes back to what you were saying about like working with the natal chart and how the
Yes.
natal chart is like this is it. It's the final answer to all of your questions. And
Yes,
so
it
for
is.
sure, like something that you can't hear at some point, an aspect, the same aspect will express itself at its best and at its worst
Yep.
every which way, and you will meet it over and over again. So at
Yep.
some point, it's going to be you're not ready to hear
Yes. Yes.
what it
If
looks like. Yeah.
if you and I had talked about hypervigilance for me as a Capricorn 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we would have had radically different conversations at every time than we're having right now. And I do think that as an astrologer, as a consulting astrologer, it is our responsibility to look at the native's chart and to adapt how we communicate for them. Because sometimes I'll be like just doing my like triple Capricorn East Coast bullshit talk, and then I'll be like, oh, they have a million placements in Libra. I need to soften the tone. I need to not come at things straight in the way that like I prefer. I need to come at things in a more kind of diplomatic and expansive way for them, or whatever. I mean, this is a stupid example, but sometimes I need to talk slower. Sometimes I need to talk faster. Sometimes I need to not cuss at all. Sometimes cussing is fucking therapy, right? And if we as practitioners and counselors adapt our communication, not our integrity, not the message, but the framing,
This
that's
is really
effective
important.
communication. It
This is
is.
really important. You said, okay, can we slow down and say the
Yeah.
sentence again? You said if we can adapt our communication, not the ethics.
Not the ethics,
And
not
so
the
that's, I
message.
think that's like,
Yeah.
that's it. It's adapting your wording, your communication style,
Yes.
not the message, not the
Yes.
ethics. And that's what's like really crucial.
Yeah.
And that takes years to learn. That takes
Yes.
years to learn, and at first you will stumble, and like I cringe thinking about the old readings that I would give a long time ago. Like when you think
Yeah.
about your beginnings and you're just trying in good intention and clumsiness and like inevitable kind of like bullshit,
Yeah.
but that we all get into. And so that's why the hypervigilance of, thank you for calling it hypervigilance, because I just have a Capricorn rising, so I'm nowhere near you as far as like Cap energy, but still, still. and
Yes.
and
So
so
Capricorn rising. Yes.
yeah, and when I heard you say something about like I almost like had a pearl clutching moment of my Capricorn was like, oh, how
Uh,
dare you betray? What is this?
yes.
And
Yep.
you're like, no, the hypervigilance. And I'm like, huh? What? I'm
Yeah.
listening.
Yeah.
Hypervigilance, is that
Yep.
what it is? Like
It's
I'm,
hypervigilance.
yeah, it is. It is.
It's Saturn is the taskmaster, and it is not so different from Venus as we would like to believe, because Saturn wants to be approved of by the community, right? By society. And it takes hypervigilance to constantly check and check and check and check and check and check and make sure, am I doing it right? Do you like me? Am I doing it right? Is this working? And that hypervigilance gets in the way of humility. It gets in the way of humility. Responsibility paired with humility allows you to be of true service to yourself and others. And this is where I think it's really, I met this astrologer. Actually, I was at Lene Van Horn, who is a spectacular astrologer who started San Francisco Astrological Society. She started it in her living room, and I went in, must have been 1995, to this meeting, and I met this astrologer once, never saw her again, never caught her name. She drove me home that day. But she said to me, she's turned to me and she said, I'm not an astrologer to make friends. I'm an astrologer because I want to help people. And that moment was pivotal. I was like, oh, I don't have to lead with my Venus. I don't have to, I mean, listen, I incorporate my Venus, but I don't have to lead with diplomacy. I don't have to lead with trying to make everyone like me or make everyone have a nice experience. And a lot of astrologers do that for a variety of reasons. And that's not inherently bad. But what I say to people in consultations in terms of your personal life, I'll say about astrology. If your ambition is to get along and to be liked and to not make people feel bad, then no one can trust that you're being honest. Because there's no person who has a birth chart that doesn't include the challenging planets. There's no person who doesn't have challenging transits. There's no person who lives in a perfect world without systemic issues. So we have to have shitty things. And if you're an astrologer and you don't have the capacity to consult about shitty, scary, challenging things, then it's maybe not the best thing for you to be consulting. And I don't mean that in a mean way. I mean that of like, so develop the skill. It's a skill. Nobody starts a career path with all the skills. That's not a thing, right? Like I took classes and I practiced and I studied and I, did a lot of things over the course of many, many years. And I always think that it's important for me because sometimes people look at me and they don't think 50, that I'm a 50-year-old, and they don't understand that I have 30 years of consulting experience. And so I want to always reiterate, okay, yeah, not young. I mean, I'm not old, but I'm definitely not young. Thank you. Thank you very much. But I do always want to remind people, like, I would not have had a podcast 10 years into my practice. No way. I would not have had a podcast 20 years into my practice. No way. Because I wouldn't have been good enough yet. I wouldn't have been ready. And not everybody has to have the same standards as
There
me.
she is, the Capricorn.
There's the Capricorn.
There
right.
she is. That was great.
There it is. Exactly. But you see what I'm saying, right? Yeah. Like I didn't start really good. Yeah. I practiced. I struggled. I fucked up. I took a path and I explored it and then it didn't work. Yeah, I used to use progress charts. I did. And then I was like, no, I don't need to. It's a waste of my energies. And I stopped. And that was a determination I made over time. And, you get to make your own determinations. But the point is you try things. You try things and you determine what works in your practice and in your utility of astrology, right? Because different people use astrology in different ways.
100%. And I think that there's like a gorgeous symbiosis between like the person and their method in a way. Like it's like how people look like their dogs a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, yeah, of course you would be a natal and transit person. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And of course such and such would be a Hellenistic, and then there would be the evolutionaries. Like it fits perfectly for their person and for their path and for their clients, which is also something, because like when you were saying about this Venus, the Venus, so also a double Taurus, so I'm like, okay, wait, this Venus story of I guess some people need that in their astrologer, like they need a lot of people go to the astrologer to do a mirror.
Yes.
They want to see a mirror that is going to feel like valuable, or that is going to make them remember their beauty, their worth. And that's like a type of work.
Absolutely.
That astrologers do beautifully, of like actually being the person that's going to make you feel whole and that's going to make you feel seen and found. And they're going to do it in their own Libra way. And that could have never been, I mean, I'm not saying that, I'm certain that you do make your people feel good too.
That's not my motivation.
But it's not why you do it. You're not trying to do that. But some people, it's like literally why their clients will come to them is to feel like they have a reflection of their beauty, because they forgot a lot. I mean, and it would be super simple if they could like word it that way, but usually they come in thinking that it's something else. And then you ask like, okay, wait, you really need to hear this confirmation. They want somebody who looks at them from another perspective to remind them that, no, you're okay. You're doing it right. It's okay to be like you,
Yes.
So that would be like the more Venusian approach, I guess, to astrology.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because as you say that, it's like, I definitely feel that I do that, but I do that in my triple Capricorn way. And this is, essentially what you're referring to is really important. And anyone who's part of like an IRL astrology community knows this. Everybody lives their chart, whether you're an astrologer or you're, a physician or an athlete or, like whatever, it doesn't matter. We all live our charts. And so as we use astrology, we live our charts. And also we can develop skills. We can practice and study and develop skills. And everyone, regardless of your birth chart, needs to develop skills to be a competent and ethical astrologer. Right. And so, some of the skills I have to develop is like learning how to like slow down and soften. And somebody else might need to learn to develop the skill of, conflict, talking about conflictual things or being present with somebody else's grief, I should say I have Venus in the first house. It's not like I don't know from Venus, but but all to say, like, we all have to learn as astrologers, and being an astrologer is a path, is, as you said in the context of something else earlier, it's not a destination, it's a process. And we must evolve with our transits and however else you use astrology, right? We must evolve. And if we don't evolve, we become stuck. And then what I'm seeing, what I think has always happened with astrologers, but is especially happening now with astrologers, is that you can get attached to having fans who like gas you up, who believe in things you say, but that's not going to help you on a soul level. This is not going to help you at all. People can now become astrologers for fame and attention. That's pretty new. That's a pretty new thing that people can do that. I mean, when we could look back at, like, the kings who hired the astrologers, but they were scholars, and it wasn't a diverse group of people. It was a very exclusive, it was a very specific group of men. But now we have like issues that didn't exist in the world of astrology before, around the ego, around, like, there's more room for more charlatans to exist on more levels now. And I think that that's really important, and I don't like to, as I talk about that, I always am like struggle with, like, I don't want to ever shit on my colleagues. And I think we always have to talk about that because
Yeah.
it is an unvetted field. It is a completely unvetted field. And I am self-taught. I didn't go to a school. I have no certification. And I think I'm a fucking great astrologer. That said,
No, but you're okay, so you're self-taught though.
I'm
So
self-taught.
yeah, like let's put the Capricorn again back into this thing. Like, okay, you're
Yeah.
self-taught, which doesn't mean like you learned astrology by looking at memes. You're self-taught, you're self-taught from an angle also where you had teachers, you started
Yes.
in Egypt, you've read the books in French, you're
Yeah.
very well read,
Right.
um, and
Right.
you've
It
made
was
your own
pre-internet.
education, right?
Yes. And in a pre-internet world, so there were no memes and there were no blog posts and there were no like
No.
simple, easy ways to get the astrology.
And also you know your shit though. Because like I mean I remember like one of the things that we had spoken in previous conversation was that you were saying like one thing that you would recommend to all astrology students would be like to learn how to draw a chart by hand. And
Yes.
there's like a level of practice and knowledge that you have of the craft that is, rare.
Yeah.
Um, not only because of your years, but also because you're very well self-taught, if I may.
Thank
You know
you.
what I
Thank you. I
mean?
appreciate that. Yeah.
Is it, it's not just bullshit, but you're right, it's not regulated. We don't have like certifications across the board. There are some bodies that certify, but
Yeah.
it's difficult
And
to.
it's not always accessible, right? Like old school astrology community, a lot of it is very white, very straight, very cis. There are a lot of like cultural issues in those communities, and I think the conventional world of astrology that I came up in, is evolving and is trying and is also like the rest of the world what it is, and there are problematic components to it. And
Right.
um, you know,
Can
I
sorry,
yeah,
I'm going
no,
to
it's
totally
fine.
interrupt because I want to go back to
Yeah,
another that was so interesting. So can we talk a little bit
yeah.
about like internet fame? Like, okay, so you're internet famous
I,
ish? Yeah.
I mean, I don't think of it. I don't think of it that way. I have been told that, but
You get recognized when you go to Trader Joe's? Like, are people like Jessica? Yeah,
I get recognized. Yeah,
yeah, you do.
hmm
So
yeah,
so that's like a level where
but
like
not everywhere. I mean, anyways,
no,
but yeah,
but at
yeah, yeah,
Trader
yeah,
Joe's though.
yeah. Okay, sure, 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 sure. It's happened. It's happened.
It's
Yes,
happened, right?
yeah,
There's like a level where your work has like steeped into the culture of astrology in a way that
yeah.
is impactful enough that for professional astrologers, like you're, beloved, recognized as like a you cultural icon. Some may like
Very nice. You're making my 12th house very uncomfortable, but I
sure.
will accept. Let's get, yes. Okay,
Okay.
get to the question because
Sure.
it's too hard.
And
Yeah,
yeah. And like, is that like something so that you protect yourself from? Try not to, like, is it a thing where you're like, oh, I don't want my ego to go into like this like yucky thing, and
Yes.
like, do you have to exercise like being normal in situations where people are like fanning over your work, or like how do you like
Yeah.
this whole like parasympathetic, no, not sympathetic,
Parasocial. Parasocial. Yeah.
that one, the
Yeah.
para one, where there's like, oh my God, I love you. And you're like, I don't know you, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is
It's
that,
it is hard. I I'm not motivated by fame. I want to be very, very, very clear. Like I'm a 12th house person. That is not my motivation. There are a lot of things I do. So I pull back from social media quite a bit in recent years for lots of reasons. But I think it's very hard to not cultivate a cult of personality, to not virtue signal on social media because the medium is inherently corrupted. And so it's really hard to use that medium in a way that isn't problematic. And I think I certainly know people who do that, who navigate that with ethically and well, but they're more comfortable being seen than I am, and they're more comfortable, you know, they either want fame or they're just comfortable with it. That's not who I am, and that's okay. You know what I mean? We are who we are, and all that kind of stuff. But there's a lot of things I do. Like if I'm having something personal and I might share it to my stories, I'll share it days after it happened or weeks after it happened. I don't share it the same as it happens, as a way to both protect myself in terms of like cybersecurity, but also it's an energy boundary for me. Because when I'm in the energy of something in my personal life, it is not when I'm also sharing it publicly. I want that energy to be different because I need to be really clear about who I am and who I'm not. And I understand. So when I was in my early 20s, I worked. I'm going to reframe this. Sorry, let me say it differently. I understand that in the nature of a parasocial relationship is Neptunian. It's fantastical. It is not literal, right? And therefore, when one is in a parasocial relationship, whether you are projecting onto someone or you are receiving that projection, either way, it is by its very nature not based in reality. No, it's based on some level of a spiritual connection and a reality that exists in the ether, but not on the material plane. And part of being a consultant means that I am holding space for other people's projections onto me. And this is why one of the reasons why I limit my personal sharing on my podcast. I don't like to use a lot of I statements on my podcast. And if somebody's paying attention, they will notice is not my primary way of communicating is with I statements. You don't hear me talk about my day. You don't hear me talk about my feelings a whole lot unless I feel that it is instructive or essential, right? Because I don't want it to be about me. And I understand and accept that it is about me because I'm a person that you're hearing my voice and that is what that is. It's something I'm constantly thinking about and navigating and trying to give people tools around having boundaries. And, if you're very Neptunian, you're going to, for sure, have more parasocial relationships than if you're more Saturnian, right? That's just like astrology explains it, right? I don't know if I'm really answering your question, but I am. Okay, good, because that would be a great place.
I was just, like wondering how you navigate that because we were talking about like some people who would now even like use astrology in ways to be famous, which I think like in a way,
Yeah.
maybe I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I have to check myself. Like I'm not sure what I think
I
yet.
don't think it's right or wrong.
Exactly.
But it isn't a motivation of helping other people.
No.
When we center the self, we are by very fucking virtue of that not centering others, and that compromises the work. And so
Right.
it's not that it's bad, but it means that that's not going to be the person I go to for my trauma or for my massive life choices, because their
Exactly.
primary objection is being liked and being right. And with all things, I don't want my doctor, my surgeon to have that primary objective. I don't want my mechanic to have that primary objective. I don't want my besties to have that primary objective. But I do want, like, my favorite singer maybe to have that or something. Like, it's okay to have that. And it's okay to want people whose that's their primary objective. But like, that for me is not what I want in a
Right. It's not
counselor.
astrology for care. So what you're
Correct.
really
Yeah.
like about is like this thing of like community care, care for people, giving to people. Like you're in this to give something.
Yeah.
You're and so is there like I mean when looking from the outside to you like and listening to your story and how it came about and how you're a little bit like I feel like you're plucked out of I mean I know Montreal. It's like you it's nowhere. A little it's not nowhere, but it's
No.
there's somewhere, you know what I mean? It's like you're plucked and you're put in these special circumstances that kind of like shape you. Some of it, of course, feels like agency and willingness and stubbornness and resilience and all of these things. And then some of it feels like really like riding a wave and just
Hmm.
like being yourself fully and just showing up as you are to
Yeah.
whatever shows up, you know? But there's something a little bit so you mentioned the word purpose before, which for me is always like I try to like I don't know, like when I use this word, like it's like, okay, what do we mean right now? It's a word
Hmm.
that's, like it's distorted. There's a lot of people that feel like they need to like delay purpose, that purpose
Hmm.
is not something that can be had right now. It's
Yeah.
like a midnight snack or something, like
Yeah.
must wait and suffer
Yeah.
or yearn something of that extent, but for me there's something really beautiful watching you just like evolve in this thing where you're just showing up as it needs
Hmm.
it,
Yeah.
right? Is there like a sense of like calling service, like do you feel like this is part
Yeah.
of what's going on, like a
100%.
soul calling?
Yes, 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 100%. I am driven by purpose and meaning and service, and not in an altruistic way. I get meaning from prioritizing what gives me meaning. I have a sense of purpose by following my purpose, and being of service to others requires me to be of service to myself. So it's not
Abnegation,
self-sacrificing
right?
way. I'm not self-sacrificing at all. I am I am choosing what is in alignment for me. And for most of my life, that has been at cross purposes with society, and that has put me on the outsides of things. And in the past, maybe decade, all of a sudden, astrology is popular, and being queer is something that we can talk about in public. And there's like all of a sudden, people, everybody's queer or whatever, everybody's genderqueer, everybody's talking about things that were really only queer, only in queer community were these conversations. Now straight people, or people who primarily live in heterosexual ways, are having these conversations. I mean, the world has evolved, very luckily for me, to encompass these parts of my identities, and to which I am very grateful. But I was me before, and it will be
Yeah.
me again. And some of this is, I mean, I can point to lots of things in my chart that make this so, and some of this is also, some of it's, again, like astrology, we can point to it. And also, this is how my 12th house functions a little bit, because even though I am a triple Capricorn, I have accepted long ago, based on my ancestral identities, based on my queerness, that I was never going to be accepted. Also, my health stuff, that I was never going to be accepted by society. So when I threw away the drive to be accepted by society, when that was no longer a motivation for me, there's so much freedom. So much freedom. I was never going to be conventionally beautiful. Fine. Okay. So how do I lean into that? I was never going to be, I was never going to make money at my career. Fine. Cool. How do I lean into that? For me, accepting how I was outside of society is exceptionally, it has really given me so much freedom in my life, And that is, I think, something that translates through my work. I'm forever encouraging people to practice accepting where you are and what you're not. Because if you can accept what you're not, then you have the freedom to embrace what you are, you know? If you can accept where you're not, then you can accept where you are. Like there's it sounds so simple, but most of us most of the time are not doing that, and there is so much freedom in just accepting that you are who you are and you're not who you're not. And some skills can be developed and some can't. Some
Exactly.
things can be changed, some can. And instead of like wringing our hands and obsessing on what does it mean and how can I change it and oh my God, this is so terrible for me, which there's a phase of development that those things are appropriate to do. I'm a fan of suffering. I'm a fan of complaining. I'm never going to shit on those things, but it's like for a limited time. If you are just like everything's going to work out okay and it's the golden age of society, that's good for a time in a context. And the same thing is true for complaining and for being like wringing your hands and being like, oh my God, the train's coming in, we're all going to get smushed, right? Okay, but at a certain point, you get up and get off the track, right? You help other people off the track. So I am a fan of that. And again, I use astrology as a way to facilitate that for my clients. Um, Yeah, and it's not per se prescriptive, but it is instructive,
Hmm.
right? The birth chart. So, anyways, yeah,
It's super, super interesting. It makes me think, you said something about like medical astrology and like it's always you're really like in this way of like caring for others. But wait, hold up. Rewind. I
hmm
have too many things. You're talking, and then there's like tabs that open in my head. I'm like,
I
wait,
love it.
talk about it. I want to talk about this. I want to talk about this. But one thing that I want to ask you is like, you were always this way? Like, would it be like a surprise for your family to be like, oh, this is what happened to Jessica? Like, are they like, oh my God, what happened? Or are they like, yeah, duh, that
As
was
I'm an
yeah,
astrologer.
that you're an astrologer, that you are now the adult who you are, that you were going to become that. Like, do you think like were you always in this design, or is this something that
Mhm.
is learned or
That's interesting. I don't know what my family thinks, and it's never occurred to me to really question it. So when I say I came out when I was 17. That was it. That was it. If I was gonna be gay, then just go fucking do whatever weird kind of shit you're gonna do anyways.
right?
We're talking about, the early 1990s, Montreal, but it was not specific or exclusive to Montreal. I just once the gay thing happened, it was just kind of like, well,
Whatever you're gonna be.
whatever kind of weird thing you're gonna do. You're gonna be an astrologer, right? I moved in 1994. I was 19 years old to be an astrologer. My mother said, "Go be JoJo." You know JoJo,
Jojo
right?
Sepa. Yeah.
Yeah, she said, "Go be JoJo." But everyone else in my family was just like my grandmother, who just died a couple of years ago. She would always call my clients the crazies, and she'd be like, "Okay, go help your crazies." Um, but I was never seeking approval. I don't want people to be mean to me. But I don't need anyone to understand what I'm doing. I just need to do what's in alignment for me. And
And was
again,
that
I
was that
really,
always true? Was that always true? Were you this type of kid? Like, were you willful
no,
and
no,
no?
something in the mix of that. I mean, listen, and I want to just be clear. I want to just take a pause and say I'm aware of time, and I
Yeah.
do have to go
Yeah.
soon.
Okay.
But I can say that I was born with something called ptosis. So my eye, you can see it doesn't open. And I, you know, I it is dramatic now, but it was much more dramatic as a child. It was worse as a child. And of course I was made fun of, but also I was told by doctors that when I got my period, when I started menstruating, that it would fix itself. It did not. But having this on my face really upset the adults in my life, the teachers, the family members, and of course it was like upsetting. It was like it was a disability, it was a problem, it was all the things. And so for me, my
You have
experience,
an eye that's like a little smaller than the other.
it's not a little smaller. It's actually like half the size. It's half
Okay.
the width, and it doesn't open. I can open it and close it, but there's no like no expression.
Okay.
And when I was younger, it was always very swollen, and it was the whole thing. But it is interesting that as I've gotten older, people seem to notice it less, or at least like comment on it less. I think that's a little bit the world. I think that like having evolved and changed about how we look at difference. Maybe it's better, but also my aesthetic is a little wild and busy because I developed that aesthetic in part because I like it and in part because it distracts from my eye. As a teenager, I wore glasses when I didn't need them to distract from my eye. But anyways, all to say, I had these things on my face, and this thing on my face that really was a problem for everyone around me. And so I had a decision to make about how I was going to be. And because I'm Canadian, I was offered a surgery when I was 16. It would have been a free surgery to fix my eye. And the doctor was like, yeah, 75% chance your eyes will never be normal looking. But you have to be awake for the surgery. And, we're just going to cut into your eyelid and try to fix it. And I decided at that point, so at the age of 16, I was like, no, I would rather just have the face I have and live the life I get than go through that. And I have been offered every time I've gone to an eye doctor ever since. I've been offered the same surgery, and I always say no, no, thank you. And they're always surprised. All the doctors are surprised. So not every single time, but most of the times. So all to say, I've had a number of things in my life. I could keep on naming, but whatever. A number of things in my life that have affirmed to me from a young age, you're never going to belong. There's something different about you. Everyone can see what's different about you. So my family's expectations of me and my expectations of belonging, they're not normal. They're not normal, I'll say. It's not like the common experience. And so, I'm an astrologer, I'm gay, was enough for people to adjust their expectations. That I have this I was enough to adjust expectations. There are different things about my background and my family. So I don't know if I've always been this way, but I've worked really hard to be this way. I can say I've worked really hard to be this way. And it is the best way for me to be. And I'm not saying it's the best way for a person to be. It's the best way for me to be. Yeah.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Listen, I think it's beautiful. You've said a lot of things. I think we have a lot of amazing thoughts from you, and I'm really grateful for all the time that you've given me, and I don't
Oh,
praise you more.
I wish we could talk for 2 more
And
hours.
seriously,
I
it's really
love talking to
like
you.
I want to ask you more questions forever. Like it's always like it's so interesting to like dig into your mind because you're so intelligent and you really like
It's very
me.
kind.
You have something really special to share, and I think it's really important. I'm so glad that I get to have these conversations with you. So, in the old show in the old show, because this is the new show, but before
Yeah.
in the olden days, it was inside the actor studio, that old show. And so, James Lipton, he would ask his people questions from the Proust questionnaire,
Mhm.
it was like these questions about like blah blah blah. And my favorite one is the last one, which is like, if there is a God, when you die, what do you wish they would say to you when they meet you at the pearly gates? And I kind of like love this question. Like
Mm.
no pressure on God or whatever, use your own
Yeah.
insert preferred.
Well,
Uh,
I'll say I've never thought of that before, but I would say you don't need to go back there.
yeah,
That's what I'd love to hear from.
done.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're done with the meat suit. No more meat suits. That would be my
that would be your preference.
fingers crossed.
Amazing.
Fingers crossed. Not holding my breath, but that would be it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
So we're signing on your petition.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate that. No more meat suits.
No more meat suits. Jessica,
Yeah,
thank you so much for doing
thank
this.
you.
everybody who wants to hear more details about your work, of course, they can find your podcast on every platform. It's called Ghost of a Podcast.
Yes.
It's
And I have a
just
book coming out. Actually, it's a book of meditations, of astrological meditations, and the first one drops today, November 28th.
no
It's
way.
yeah, it's called Meditations for Mercury Retrograde. Meditation for Mercury Retrograde.
Oh, I love that.
It's available on Audible. And then on January 2nd, it's astrological meditations for your sign. So it's a meditation for each zodiac sign. And it's not meant to be like, if you're a Taurus, you should listen to Taurus. It's meant to be, we all have all 12 signs in the birth chart. So to tap into, access, and work with different archetypal energies inside of yourself, you can listen to each given meditation. And I'll be very excited for you to listen to the Capricorn meditation, because what I focus on within it is not what you might expect. Because the thing that everyone forgets about freaking Capricorn is that it is I think it's the only zodiac sign that is represented by a mythical creature. We're not represented by the goat. We're represented by a goat with a fishtail. We're like a goat mermaid. Why do people forget that Capricorns are Mary Poppins? We're magic.
They think we're a man in a suit. We were never that.
Correct. And that is the great con of the goat fish that is Capricorn. And so anyways, it's a great meditation, I think. Anyways, you can get those on Audible. I'm very excited. It's something radically different from what I've done in the past. I'm not known to be the most relaxing person in the room usually, but this, I hope,
The
is
train is
very
coming.
soon.
Breathe in. The train is coming.
The train is coming. Exhale. Now run. Exactly. But yeah, my hope is that people get a lot of value out of it, and it's available on Audible.
Beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
And see you soon.
Yay. Okay, great.